First, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming to the session. My name is Brian.
My name is Ananya.
And we are engineers here at Salesforce. We work on a team called Platform Dev Tools, and we support the Salesforce Extensions for Visual Studio Code. So you may have seen the extensions and VS Code in action while you've been at Trailhead DX, but our session in particular is focused on the extensions themselves and how you can use them when you're developing on the platform. But before we get into all of that, we have our forward-looking statement. It would not be a Salesforce presentation without one. So make sure you're making purchasing decisions based on what's generally available today. Lucky for all of us here, what we're going to show you is both generally available and free. So let's take a quick look at our agenda first. Ananya is going to give us a high-level overview of what VS Code is, what the Salesforce extensions are, and how those two things kind of go together. We also want to talk a little bit about how our team does the release process for the extensions and how we plan on supporting them going forward. After that, we're going to jump right into our live demo. This will be the bulk of our presentation. We're going to show you what it's like to get started with the Salesforce extensions, creating a new project, running a few commands, a couple of different development workflows, all that good stuff. And then finally, we hope to leave you feeling inspired. We'll give you a bunch of resources you might need to get started using these tools for yourselves. So with that said, do you want to take us away, Ananya?
Yeah, cool. So who here has already used VS Code before?
Oh.
Wow, okay, that is a lot of you. I'm very impressed right now. So hopefully all of you do learn something from this presentation. For those of you who may not be as familiar with what this is, VS Code, also known as Visual Studio Code, is a free and lightweight IDE by Microsoft. You may have heard of Visual Studio, which is a commercial product, and this is a different version of that. So this is a free and lightweight IDE, and it is open source, which means you can go online and you can actually see all of the code behind VS Code itself. It's also really cool because it is platform agnostic. This means it runs natively on Windows, Mac, and Linux. One of the reasons we really love VS Code is that it is extremely customizable. So later on in the presentation today, you're going to see us referring to an icon which represents the VS Code extension marketplace. In this marketplace, users are able to go ahead and download extensions to customize their development experience. And that is where the Salesforce extensions come into play. So these Salesforce extensions are also free and open source. That means you can actually go onto GitHub and see all of the code that Brian and I and the rest of our team has been working on day to day. And you can actually go ahead and contribute at that point as well. So like I mentioned, these extensions are free, which means you can download them directly from the marketplace as well. And to the next slide, so a little bit more about our release process. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you can actually see a link to our GitHub repository, and that is where all of our code is located. You can also see a year-long roadmap, so you can actually see what our team is planning on working on for around the next year or so. At that point, if you feel as though there's something that you've been running into, any issue, or if there's a feature request that you would like to see us work on, we would really love if you would all go ahead and hit up our GitHub link and leave an issue or a feature request, because that's how we're able to prioritize the feedback that you guys are giving us. And if you do ever see we're not working on something that you would like to see us do, then we would love it if you would also go ahead and contribute. In the past, we've also had a lot of really cool features contributed to us by our customers, and those can be sent in through pull requests on our repository. And again, we actually release every week, which is a little bit different than normal Salesforce, which means you're going to be getting new features and new value every single week. Okay, next. So today we're going to be using two different types of development models. I'm sure a lot of you already have a little bit of experience with what org development is and what the package development model is, so I'm just going to give you a high-level overview over both of them. So the first one that I want to talk about is the org development model. So in this, you can actually develop against any org. For example, today, Brian is going to be working against a sandbox. This means he's going to be using a package XML to move his metadata around. Later on, I'm going to be working with the package development model. And with this, I will be working within a Scratch org. So Scratch orgs are isolated environments for individual developers to work in and develop and test their code without affecting anybody else's. Package development model also gives us source tracking. This means that we're able to track the changes within our org and on our local file system and keep both of those to sync. And today, you're going to see Brian do the org development model. This means that during the first half of the presentation, you'll be able to see how you can actually use a lot of the DX features to do org development model type work as well. And later on, you'll see me working within a Scratch org, and you'll be able to see how some of our DX features within VS Code are really handy for you to do package development model style work as well. There is a misconception that you can only use VS Code if you're already following the DX philosophy and using the package development model, and we are here to tell you today that we actually fully support both of them. So hopefully during this presentation, you're able to see how you can use both during your development process. All right, so what is our demo? Today, we're gonna be working with an app called eBikes. eBikes is actually part of a sample gallery of apps for you guys to go ahead and access. In this sample gallery, you have access to applications that will refer you to best practices for design patterns and specific features you may be interested in implementing as well. Today, eBikes is specifically an application where bike resellers can go online and place orders for bikes. So the feature that Brian and I will be working on today is where bike resellers are able to see which are the most popular products that other people have been buying. Brian is going to go ahead within his sandbox, develop the Apex portion of this feature, and I will be working within a Scratch org to develop the Lightning Web component. So I think we're ready to get started with the demo.
Awesome.
So Brian has previously been working within the developer console. So today, he's gonna get started on how to use VS Code.
Cool. So when you download and install VS Code for the first time and you open it up, you'll probably see something that looks like this. It's just a standard welcome screen. If you're not too familiar with VS Code, I'd recommend checking out some of these links they have on the side, just to teach you how to customize it to your liking, learning all the different shortcuts that makes development quick and easy, that sort of thing. So before I get started on the development, I actually want to draw y'all's attention over here to the left side of the editor. Let's see if I can zoom in there. So there's this little square icon, and this is the extension marketplace that Ananya was referring to. So if I click on that, you'll see all the extensions that are enabled in my instance of VS Code. You'll see recommended extensions. So if you're working, the kind of development you're doing, VS Code can give you recommendations of what might help you. And then, of course, if you're looking for something specific, you can just filter it with the search bar. So if I type Salesforce, you'll see all these extensions related to Salesforce, but the one that you want to be on the lookout for is the Salesforce extension pack here. So the Salesforce extension pack is going to bundle all of our different extensions together, and this is an easy way to install them without making sure that you're not missing out on any of the great features. So you can click on Extension Pack, you can see all the stuff that it comes with, Apex, Visual Force, all the debuggers, and then the Salesforce CLI integration. This is a prerequisite to use a lot of the commands, so that you should not install that directly. And then of course we have our changelog, so whenever we do a release every week, you'll see what bugs we may have fixed or what new features we've added. So I already have the extensions installed for the purpose of the demo, so normally you would see an install button here, but I already have them. So I'm going to close out of that. I'm going to go back to my file explorer. So now, let's get started. So like Ananya mentioned, I'm doing org-based development. I haven't really used too many DX tools. Most of our source lives in production orgs, sandbox orgs, that sort of thing. This may be the case for a lot of you out there. So first, I'm going to go ahead and create a brand new Salesforce DX project. So if I go ahead and push Command-Shift-P, this brings up the command palette in Visual Studio Code. So this is how you're going to run a bunch of different commands, like built-in VS Code commands. If you install any extensions that come with commands, you'll probably run them from here. And as far as the Salesforce extension goes, we prefix all of our commands with SFDX. And so you'll see a list of commands related to the extensions. There aren't too many yet because I don't have a project open, but I'm going to go ahead and hit that first one, create project with manifest. And I want the manifest because I'm going to use that package XML to do retrieves from my sandbox. And so I'm going to hit that. I'm just going to call it eBikes, hit enter, and I'm going to choose a spot for it, and that looks good. Create project. And so once the project's created, VS Code will reload the window and open up the new folder that you've created. And so you can see over here in the file browser, I have all these different folders and files that the extensions have created for me. So you'll see my DX project configuration. We've got a nice little handy git ignore that's been created for you so that you're not checking in files you don't need in your version control system, all that good stuff. And so now I have my project created, but in order to get the source, I actually need to tell VS Code what org I want to work against. So I'm really excited to announce a somewhat relatively new feature we've added called the org picker. So if you come down here to the bottom left, let me see if I can zoom in there. So you'll see something that says no default org set. So this is actually a button that I can click. So watch, if I click it, you'll be presented with 3 options that'll help you authorize and create orgs. And then you'll see a list of the orgs that I've been authorized into. So if you've never used the Salesforce CLI before, the extensions or whatever, you will not see anything here except for the 3 commands. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this first option, authorize an org. And then I'm going to select a sandbox, click that option there. I'm just going to call this demo box. I'm going to hit enter. And so I'll be brought to the Salesforce login screen. I have my sandbox credentials right there. I'm going to hit login to sandbox. And once that's done, I will just be redirected to my org as you'd expect. But if we come back to the editor, you'll see that it says authorize an org ran successfully. And then I'm going to close out of this, give myself a little more room. And then if you take a look at our org picker again, it now says the alias that I created when I was authorizing an org. So it's really nice to have just a quick glance of what org I'm working against. Cool, so I created my DX project. I've authorized against the sandbox. And so now I'm going to actually pull the source. So let's check out our manifest folder here. And we have our default package.xml. So you're obviously going to want to customize this for whatever components that you'll need when you're doing your retrieves and deploys. But for the purpose of the demo, this is fine. So if I go ahead and right-click on this package.xml, you'll see these 2 commands at the bottom. So deploy source and manifest and retrieve source. So I want to retrieve the source from my org and pull it into my local project. So I'm going to hit retrieve source. And this shouldn't take too long. eBikes is not a terribly large project. So we'll let that run. And then once it finishes, so we're kind of zoomed in here so y'all can see, but in the output view, you'll see a table of all the source that we've retrieved from our sandbox, so you can confirm that it's all the stuff you were expecting. So I'm going to close this, give myself room again. And so if you take a look at ForceApp over here, this is our package directory. So this is where all of our source is going to be retrieved to. And you might be familiar with this folder structure already, but if I hit classes, you'll see all the Apex classes that I'm going to be working with today. So I'm going to go ahead and open the product controller, and we can get started on our development. So I'm actually going to collapse the left sidebar to have some more room to work with. So if I hit Command B, I'll give myself a little more room. And then you can see right as I open the Apex class, VS Code is aware that I'm working with Apex code right here. You can actually click this and select which language you want to work with, but it's pretty smart at figuring out what you're working with. So we have all that nice Apex syntax highlighting. So I'm going to come down here and start writing my code. So this isn't a live coding session. I'm not going to write the whole thing in front of you. But it actually gives me a neat little opportunity to show you a cool VS Code feature. So there's something called user snippets. So if you are writing the same chunk of code a lot across your projects, you can actually make a user-defined snippet of that code and just easily insert it wherever you need it. So I've already made the code as a user snippet, and the way I can use it is just start typing the name of the snippet. So it's called get popular products right there. So if I hit enter, and boom, we have our code just like that. So that's pretty handy. The one downside to me not live coding in front of you is I didn't get to show you all the cool Apex language server features. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now real quick. When I'm working in an IDE now, I really want a lot of those quality of life features that you would expect, like auto-completion and finding references and things like that. And so the Apex language server is capable of doing a lot of these things. So if I just start typing products, you'll see the auto-completion happening as you'd expect. We can see all the methods that are on my Apex list, so that's pretty cool. I don't have to memorize all of them or look up the documentation. And then one of the other really cool things I like is the auto-completion of S objects. So we have a custom object in this project called product. So you can see it right there, product C. I'm just gonna make a new one real quick. If I do P dot, and so you can see all the custom fields and the standard fields that are on this object. You don't have to go into the object manager and look up all the fields. You don't have to go in your source and digging around and look for them there. You can just get them right here in auto-completion, so that's pretty nice. One thing I do want to point out, because we've gotten questions about this before, is when people will start typing, they're like, oh, I don't see auto-completion in my S-objects. One of the things you have to do first is you have to refresh your S-object definitions. So I'm going to show you real quick what that looks like. If I bring up the command palette again and I type refresh, so what this is going to do is it's going to do a describe call against the org you're currently working against, and it's going to get all of the schema information about standard objects, custom field. It's going to pull all that stuff down into your local project. I'm not going to run it because I already have it here for the demo, but make sure you do this if you're either seeing out-of-date autocomplete information on your S objects, or if you just don't see them at all. Make sure you run this command first. All right, so I just want to show you a couple of other little cool Apex language server things. So I'm going to delete this really quick. So one of the new ones we've added is, rename symbol. So I could right-click on this, say rename symbol, and you can see all the instances of that symbol get renamed in my project. If I wanted to rename like a type that's referenced in a different file, it'll take care of renaming all of the instances of it across the files. So that's pretty cool. And VS Code will open all the files where it gets changed, so you know exactly where it got changed. See, what else do we got? So we have, find all references. So I can right-click, find all references, and we can see everywhere that I'm referencing this symbol. Again, this is across your entire workspace, so that's pretty nice. And what else did I want to show you? Oh, yes. We recently started introducing refactoring capabilities. So one of the new ones we've introduced is declaring missing methods. So I could just do like, hello. I don't know, something like that. And so if I click on my method, we'll get this little light bulb icon, which will be a quick action. I can click it, and we can say create my method in product controller. And then I can right-click on it again, hit go to definition. We'll just jump right to my new method. And so it'll do the parameter inferencing. We'll check the return type, all that good stuff. And then we're starting to roll out the extract refactoring features as well. So you'll see that pretty soon. I'm just going to delete my changes. Hopefully I catch all of them before I deploy. I'm going to change that back to you. OK, so I've written my feature. We're good to go. So now I want to send it back up to my sandbox. So I'm going to open my file explorer here to the left. And if I right-click on product controller, I'll see those same deploy and retrieve commands. So I can just deploy and retrieve individual files without having to go back to my package.xml. So I'm going to hit deploy source. Hopefully OK, cool. So you'll see in the output that we've added my product controller class, and we're good to go. So the next thing I got to do is, like any good developer, we got to write our tests. So I'm going to open the test product controller class here. And I want to kind of reorganize my workspace again. I want some more room to work in. So I'm going to close this sidebar. And then when I'm writing tests, I generally like to have my test on one side and the thing I'm testing on the other side. So I can just drag this test class over here. And so I can just look at them side by side and see what I'm testing. That's pretty cool. So just like before, I'm going to go down to the bottom of my test. I have my handy little code snippet here, test popular products. I'm going to hit that. And my test is done. There's definitely nothing wrong with it whatsoever.
Are you sure it's going to pass, Brian?
I'm sure. It's fine. Watch. So I'm going to hit save. And then I'm going to right-click this file. And oh, would you look at that? We have the same deploy and retrieve commands. So I'm just going to deploy it here. I usually like to right-click on the file that I'm working in and hit deploy. So we got it there. Good. So it works. You think so?
I think you should try running it.
All right. So how do we run it? So we also have with the extensions the Apex test sidebar. So if you check out over here, we have this new little icon. It's a little beaker. So if I click that, you will see all the tests that are in my project. So I just added a brand new test, so I'm going to hit the refresh button here. And there you go. There's our test popular products test. So my features in the sandbox, My test is in the sandbox. Now I can actually run this test. So I could either run all the tests with this big button up here. I could run a test class, but in this case, I'm just going to run a single test method. So let's hit that. And we'll see the test status updated shortly. And
I'm not surprised.
I'm cocky. So you can see in the test sidebar that it's a red icon indicating that we had a failure. Sorry, I actually want to give a little bit more room so you can see this. This is very cool. So if we have a failure, I can just click on the test that failed, and it'll jump right to the line that the failure occurred at, and it'll highlight it for me. And in the output view, it'll show me, oh, assertion failed. We expected 10. The actual was 11. I just did not do my math right, because 5 plus 3 plus 3 is not 10. So we're just going to change that really quick. Set that to an 11. I'm going to right-click on my source file. I'm going to hit deploy this source to org. All right, we got our source back up. And so I can just hit this button again to run my test method. But I don't know, maybe some of you have noticed this, but there's actually a little link right on top of my test method that says run test. So this is a code lens feature. We just give you a bunch of different ways that you could run your test. You could do it from the command palette, whatever you prefer. So let's just try using the code lens this time. So that's going to run, and it's, oh no, another failure.
I think you forgot to save the file, Brian.
What would I do without you? This is why we're a team. And we're going to run the test again, and it's definitely going to pass. All right, so we got the green icon showing us that we passed, and I think we're good to go. But before I leave and let Ananya do her part, I just want to show the code coverage feature. So I'm going to put this away for a second, and I'm actually going to open up my product controller again. I'm going to close this, and I'm going to snap this back over here like I had it before. So if you look down here at the toolbar, there's this little icon. It looks like a hamburger button. If I click that, we can see, I'm not testing that part, I'm testing this part. We can see all the lines that have been covered by my test run. I'm just missing one line, so I'll take care of that later, it's fine. But you have to make sure that if you want to have code coverage like this, that you actually go into your VS Code settings and turn on code coverage. So I'll just show you all that really quick. We haven't talked about the settings yet. So I'm going to hit code, I'm going to go to preferences, I'm going to go to settings, and you can change all your VS Code settings here. If you just type Salesforce, you can see the ones specific to the extensions. And so right here, retrieve test code coverage. Make sure that you enable this setting to get the results that you're expecting. Cool. So y'all saw me develop on a sandbox. We deployed and retrieved source. I got my feature in. My test definitely works at this point. And I think I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Ananya, who's going to build the front end of our application.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So as Brian already explained, he was working within a sandbox. What I'm going to be doing now is I am actually using version control, which is how we're able to share the Apex code that he just wrote and bring it into the Scratch org that I'm currently working against. So because we've already checked all the code into Git and I've already pulled it down, I already have all of his Apex code. All right. So to actually get started. At this point, I've already authenticated into a dev hub, which is something that you would need to do to be able to create a Scratch org. So to create the Scratch org that I'm going to be working in today, I'm going to go back down to the org picker that Brian pointed out earlier. And if I click on it, you're going to see the same commands. So this command, authorize a dev hub, is the one that I ran earlier so that I can actually go ahead and create that Scratch org. Now what I'm going to do is hit create a default Scratch org. At this point, it gives you the opportunity to select what Scratch org shape you want to be working with. So I'm going to be using the one that it's suggesting for me. And then I can also enter in an alias. So I'll use demo scratch. And if I hit enter, another really cool feature that we've recently added is that you can actually configure how long you want your Scratch org to last for. So today, let's say I think I can finish my entire feature in 1 day, so I only need my Scratch org to last for a day. I'm going to change this to 1. And if I hit enter, it's going to go ahead and actually create that Scratch org. But because this is a demo, I've already created a Scratch org, and I already have everything I need in there. So I'm actually going to hit escape. And if you look down here, this new feature that it's pointing out at me, that is the Scratch org I'm actually currently working against. Okay, so what I'm going to be working on today is actually creating a Lightning Web Component. I'm sure you guys have seen the term Lightning Web Component all over this conference, but in case you aren't familiar with it yet, Lightning Web Components are Salesforce's new programming model for developing with web standards. So this is really cool because you're actually able to use standard HTML and JavaScript to go ahead and create your Lightning components. To the end user, whether it's an Aura component or a Lightning Web Component, it's going to look the exact same. It'll just be behind the scenes where you're developing a Lightning Web Component instead of Aura. So to be able to do that, I'm going to ask Brian to help me out with the keys since I have a microphone in my hand. But I'm going to open up the command palette again, and if I start typing in create, you'll see that the first option that I'm getting is create a Lightning Web Component. I also want to direct you guys to all of the other options that we're provided with here. So if you ever feel like going ahead and creating the Apex class that Brian was working with earlier, or any of these other metadata types, VS Code provides you with a really nice UI to be able to do that without having to run the CLI commands that you might be used to otherwise. So I'm going to create the Lightning Web Component. I will just call it popular for the popular products feature. And now it's also giving me the option to select what directory I want to save my component into. If you look at the top one up here, it's suggesting a default directory for me called LWC. In my situation, I already do have a directory named LWC created, but even if you didn't, this command would actually go ahead and create that directory for you as well. So I will just hit that, and it's gone ahead and created my Lightning Web Component for me, and it's opened it up as well. So the next thing that I want to show you is some of the language server features that you may not be familiar with yet, because this is one of the new things we're rolling out with developing with LWC within VS Code. So I am going to open up the File Explorer, which you can do by hitting Command P. And if you ever don't feel like navigating the tree structure, this is a really handy way of finding what you want to work with. So right now I want to open up a file called product tile list, and I want to open up the HTML. So now I'm going to go over some of the language server features. So like Brian mentioned earlier, a lot of these features are very similar to the Apex language server features that we demoed earlier. For example, this C product tile is actually showing me one of the custom Lightning Web Components that I have. And if I'm hovering over it, as I'm doing right now, you can see there's this little hover icon that shows up with a little bit of information on what exactly that component is. If I right-click, I also get the go-to definition, peak definition, find all references that we also provide with the Apex language server. For now, I'm just going to do go-to definition, and it'll actually open up the class that I was working with. Another really cool feature we have is that you're able to get autocomplete. So if I go back to my HTML file here, hit enter, and if I start typing in Lightning, you can see here it's actually populating a list with all of the standard Lightning Web Components that we offer. And the really helpful thing is that since this is my first time developing a Lightning Web Component, maybe I don't know what all of them actually represent. And hovering over each of these actually gives me a cool description on exactly what each of these Lightning Web Components are. So if I go ahead and undo my changes there, hit save. Another really cool thing I want to point out that is not about the Lightning Web Component language server is the fact that since we're using version control, there is a really cool feature built into VS Code where it'll track all of the local changes that you have made within your file system. So right now, if you look over to this left side, there's this little, I don't know what to call it, a branch icon? Yeah. So if I hover over it, you can see it says source control. And if I click on it, it's actually showing me all of the changes that I've made recently within my file system. And the other cool thing is that one of the extensions I really love working with is the Git Lens extension. And if I can direct you guys over here, this is the little icon that represents the Git Lens feature. So going over here, it can actually show you all of the different repositories you may be working with, a little bit of file history, and line history as well. I find this to be really helpful just to see which files are the ones that I maybe have just pulled in or I might be working with right now.
I don't know if y'all can see that, but see the line where it says, I guess on line 17, Renee, 4 months ago? That's pretty cool. That's part of the Git Lens extension. We use that all the time on our team.
And if I hover over it, I can actually see all of the comments that Renee must have left in his PR as well. Nice.
Cool.
Cool. So you may have noticed I haven't actually written any code yet. That would be because this is a demo and we were sneaky and already created the Lightning Web Component. So instead, what I'm going to do is I want to push everything I have on my local file system up to my org itself. So because VS Code is context aware, it knows that I'm working within a Scratch org and no longer need those deploy and retrieve commands that Brian was using with his sandbox. So if I hit Command-Shift-P and open up the command palette, and if I hit push, you can see it's actually giving me the options to push source to default Scratch org. So in this scenario, you can either override conflicts or just push. For now, I'm going to choose to override my conflicts. And at the bottom, it's actually going to run the command itself. Luckily, it looks like everything ran successfully. So what I want to do now is actually open up my org and see everything that we've been developing so far. So,
sorry, do you need help with the?
Yes.
Boom.
Cool. So with Brian's help, I can point out this cool little browser icon next to our org picker. This browser icon allows you to actually open the org that you're working against super easily. So if I click on this, it's running the open default org command, and it's actually going to open up my Scratch org for me. And if I open up my app launcher, I can see the eBikes app that we've been working with this whole time. And what I want to do now is actually take our feature and add it onto the page. So I'm going to go into my product explorer. These are all the super cool bikes that our resellers have been using. And I'm going to hit this gear icon, hit edit page. And here is our Lightning app builder. So on the left side here, this is a popular product custom Lightning web component we've created. So I'm just going to drag this onto the page, hit save, and if I go back, I can actually see that the Fuse X2 and Fuse X1 are apparently the most popular bikes. So now what I want to do is actually go back to my VS Code, and I want to see what are the changes that I've made in my org so far. Maybe you've left a day in between making the changes in your org and actually going into your file system. So sometimes you might want to see what the changes are before deciding to pull them down. So I'm going to hit the command palette again. And if I type in view, I got the option to view changes in default Scratch org. And when I hit this, in my output view, it's actually going to show me the changes that I expected to see. So in this scenario, I dragged a new element onto my Flexi page, and that is exactly what it's showing me. So at this point, I would actually pull down all of the source from my Scratch org. And since we are using version control, and I want Brian to have access to whatever changes I've made, I would also at this point go ahead and push all of my changes up to GitHub. Awesome. So I think that is actually the end of our demo today. So I'm going to go back to our presentation and recap. Okay, so we breezed through a lot of different features today, and the point was not for all of you to memorize everything that we showed you, but the point was for you to get an idea of what it's like to work with VS Code and actually go through a development process. So today we talked to you all a little bit about what Visual Studio Code itself is, how the extensions come into play. We went over how you can actually do a package development model within VS Code, or you could be doing org development model and working within a sandbox. We showed some of the awesome language server features that we offer with Apex and now with Lightning Web Components as well. And we showed you some of the really handy command palette tools that will help you maybe not use some of your command line tools that you were using earlier. And lastly, we also went over how simple it is to test all of your Apex code within VS Code as well. So, what are some of the things that we would recommend for you guys to look at later? So, up here, you're going to see all 4 of these are trailheads that we would really recommend. So the first one is a quick start on actually developing with VS Code. It'll go a little bit more into depth on what it is to go through your normal development flow than what we did today, and it'll be a really handy way for you to brush up on all of those skills. The next one is on debuggers. So one of the big topics that we didn't touch on today is how to use debuggers within VS Code. We've made it really easy for all of you to actually go through and test all and debug all of your Apex code. And so one of the ways you can do that is through our Apex Interactive Debugger or through the Apex Replay Debugger. This Trailhead will do a really good job of explaining the Apex Replay Debugger to you, so we would really recommend checking that out.
We also had, just to plug this, we also had a colleague that did a talk yesterday exclusively on debuggers, so it's a large enough topic for that. Hopefully when they upload all the presentations, that's one of the ones included, like in a couple of weeks or something like that.
Yeah, so the first one that you see on the screen up there is the one that we were trying to plug right now with the Apex Replay Debugger. And if I go back to this slide, so the last 2 trailheads I want to point out are the package development model and org development model. We really touched on those in the context of VS Code, but if you want to learn more about what those development models are, because there's a lot more to them than what we explained today, we would really recommend checking out those trailheads as well. Next, our documentation site. We recently redid this documentation site, and it makes it really easy for all of you to go there and see if you have any normal questions, and just learn a little bit more about some of the specific features that we have within VS Code. Lastly, most importantly, is a link to our GitHub. Because this is what Brian and I and our entire team work on every day, we really want to hear from all of you if you ever run into any issues or if there are ever any features that you would like to see us working on. That GitHub link is the best way for you to contact us or to work with us on anything else you would like to see in the future.
We have a big planning meeting coming up, so if you've got feature requests, if you've got bugs, I would get them in soon because we're going to be taking a hard look at them in the next couple of days.
Yeah, and so the last thing I want to point out is some of the future sessions that you all can attend to today. So the first one has already passed because that was on Wednesday and it's Thursday now, but hopefully in a few weeks you'll be able to access the recording. And then the other 3 sessions are all really great sessions for you to just learn more about the whole Salesforce development platform as a whole. So we hope you guys all really enjoyed our presentation today, and if you all have any questions, this is the time to ask them. Thank you.
Can't forget the GIFs.